Here is something most people never talk about. What happens when the anxious partner finally stops trying? We spend so much time talking about attachment styles like they are fixed labels. Like one person is just anxious and the other is just avoidant and nothing ever changes. But that is not the whole story. The real story begins at a very specific moment. The moment when the person who always reached out, always apologized first, always gave one more chance, finally decides they are done. That is when the whole dynamic flips upside down. That is when everything the avoidant thought was safe suddenly starts to feel terrifying. And if you have been on either side of this kind of relationship, what you are about to hear is going to hit very close to home. Stay with me because this is not just about love. This is about what it costs two people when they keep playing the same broken game over and over again. For a long time in these relationships, the anxious partner is the one doing all the heavy lifting. They are the emotional engine. They are the ones who send the text after a fight. They are the ones who say, "Can we please talk about this?" They are the ones who stay up past midnight going over every conversation in their head, wondering what went wrong. They apologize even when they are not the ones who did something wrong. They forgive faster than they should. They stretch themselves thin just to keep the peace. And they do all of this because deep down they believe that if they are just patient enough, kind enough, consistent enough, the other person will eventually meet them where they are. That belief is what keeps them going, but it is also what keeps them stuck, because the avoidant partner in the relationship notices this pattern too, even if they never say it out loud. Somewhere inside they know that no matter how much they pull back, the anxious person will reach out again. No matter how cold or distant they become, there will be another text, another call, another chance, and without even realizing it, the avoidant starts to rely on that. They get comfortable with the idea that their emotional unavailability will never truly cost them anything. They believe the other person will always come back, and for a while they are right. But here is what the avoidant never accounts for. People have limits. Even the most loving, emotionally generous person has a breaking point. And when the anxious partner finally reaches theirs, it does not look the way you might expect. There is no dramatic scene. There is no final argument. There is no last message filled with pain. It is quieter than that. It is just silence. And for the avoidant, that silence is the beginning of a nightmare they never saw coming. Let us talk about what that silence actually looks like from the inside. The anxious partner has been bending for so long that bending starts to feel normal. They start to think that maybe they really are too much. Maybe they really do want too much. Maybe the problem is them. They internalize everything. Every time they are left on read, every time a plan gets cancelled, every time they feel like they are begging for basic emotional presence, they turn it inward and ask, what is wrong with me? They carry guilt for things that were never their fault. They shrink themselves to fit into a space that was never big enough for them in the first place. And all of that quiet suffering adds up. It does not explode. It just quietly erodes something inside them. And one day they wake up and the fight is gone. Not the love necessarily, but the fight, the drive to keep chasing, the willingness to keep explaining, that is gone. And when that goes, everything changes. Here is the part nobody warns you about. The avoidant partner has been living in a kind of false peace. They pull away, the anxious one chases, and that rhythm starts to feel like stability to them. The distance feels like freedom. The quiet feels like comfort. But what they do not realize is that their peace was built on someone else's pain. It was possible only because someone else was working overtime to keep the connection alive. When that person stops working overtime, when they finally put down the weight they have been carrying alone, the avoidant is left standing in a silence that feels completely different from the one they used to enjoy. This silence is not peaceful, it is hollow, and there is a huge difference between the two. Suddenly the avoidant finds themselves checking their phone. Suddenly they notice how long it has been since that person reached out. Suddenly the space that used to feel like relief starts to feel like loss, and that is when the panic sets in. Not the kind of panic that shows up loud and obvious. No, this is the kind that creeps in slowly. The kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning asking yourself why you let things get to this point. The kind that makes you scroll back through old messages wondering if you missed something. The kind that makes you realize that what you thought was freedom was actually just someone else's love being used as a safety net you never bothered to appreciate. And now that the net is gone, you are in free fall. This is important because it gets to the heart of what avoidant behavior is actually rooted in. It is not coldness. It is not cruelty. It is fear. A very specific kind of fear. The fear of being too close, of needing someone too much, of losing yourself inside another person's world. The avoidant partner keeps people at arm's length not because they do not care, but because getting close feels dangerous to them. Every time someone tries to pull them in, something inside them screams danger, and they pull back. They have done this so many times it has become automatic. They do not even question it anymore. They just retreat and tell themselves they need space, and maybe they do need space. But there is a difference between needing space and using space as a permanent wall between yourself and anyone who tries to love you. What the avoidant does not fully understand is that their fear of being engulfed by someone else has blinded them to a different and much scarier possibility, the possibility of being truly left. They never imagined that the person begging for closeness would one day stop begging altogether. They never considered that their emotional unavailability had a price. They thought the dynamic would just continue forever. That is the miscalculation that changes everything, because when the anxious partner walks away, the avoidant is suddenly confronted with the one thing they never prepared for: absence, real absence. Not the kind they created themselves, the kind that was chosen for them. And that hits differently. Now let us shift back to the anxious partner for a moment, because what they go through when they finally decide to walk away is incredibly complex and incredibly brave. Make no mistake, leaving is not easy for them. Their whole pattern has been built around staying, around hoping, around believing things will get better. Walking away goes against everything their nervous system has been trained to do. Every part of them wants to send one more message, make one more attempt, give one more chance. The urge to reach back out can feel almost unbearable, but they resist it, not because they do not love the other person, but because they have finally started to love themselves enough to stop accepting less than what they deserve. That is the shift, that is the turning point. For the anxious partner, choosing to walk away is not giving up on love. It is finally understanding that love is not supposed to feel like a constant uphill battle. It is not supposed to feel like you are the only one who shows up. It is not supposed to leave you feeling empty, confused, and chronically insecure. Real love should feel like solid ground, not like sand that keeps shifting under your feet. And when they finally get clear on that, walking away becomes less like an ending and more like a release. They are not walking away from love. They are walking away from a version of love that was costing them too much, and there is a quiet kind of power in that moment. A peace that comes not from having everything figured out, but from finally choosing themselves when no one else did. Here is something that often gets missed in conversations about these dynamics. The anxious partner has usually done enormous amounts of personal work throughout the relationship. They have read books, listened to podcasts, tried therapy, journaled, reflected, apologized, communicated. They have made real effort to understand their own patterns and to grow past them. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner often does very little of that work because they never had to. The anxious one kept the relationship going, so the avoidant never felt the full consequences of their emotional unavailability. The pain was always absorbed on the other side. But when the anxious partner leaves, that protective buffer disappears. The avoidant is now sitting with all of it: the silence, the absence, the realization of how much they took for granted. And if they are honest with themselves, they also start to feel the loneliness they had been numbing through distance all along. Because here is the truth: the avoidant was never truly at peace. They were just good at pretending distance was the same thing as contentment. Now, without someone constantly trying to reach them, they have to face what that distance was always covering up: a deep fear of being truly alone, a fear of being seen and then left, a fear that if they let someone all the way in, they will eventually be rejected. These fears did not go away just because they kept people at arm's length. They just went underground, and now they are surfacing. This moment, as painful as it is actually the most important moment for the avoidant partner, because it is the first time they cannot run from what is happening inside them. They have run out of people to hide behind. They have run out of the comfort of knowing someone is still out there chasing them. They are just alone with themselves and their patterns and the question of whether they are willing to change. And that question is everything. Because some people reach this point and they choose to grow. They start asking themselves why they kept pulling away from someone who genuinely tried to love them. They start uncovering the old wounds that taught them closeness was dangerous. They start doing the inner work they avoided for so long. And when they do that work, they become capable of a depth of love they were never able to offer before. But some people reach this point, and instead of growing, they react. They try to chase now. They send messages. They suddenly show up emotionally in ways they never did while they had the chance. They call it growth, but really it is panic. And there is a difference between genuine change and someone trying to get back what they lost simply because losing it scared them. For the anxious partner who has finally walked away, this is the most crucial thing to understand. Someone reaching out after you leave does not automatically mean they have changed. It might just mean they are uncomfortable with the outcome. Real change takes time. Real change looks different from a desperate text at midnight. If you have been the anxious one and you have finally made the decision to protect your peace, guard it, because the pull to go back will be strong, especially if the avoidant suddenly becomes the version of themselves you always hoped they would be. But you need to ask yourself whether they are showing up because they genuinely understand what they did and what it cost, or whether they are just afraid of being alone. That distinction matters more than almost anything else. There is something worth saying about what both of these people carry after the relationship ends. The anxious partner carries grief, real grief, because they love deeply, they invested everything. And walking away does not mean the love disappeared overnight. They grieve the version of the relationship they always hoped it would become. They grieve the moments where things felt almost right. They grieve the person they saw potential in, even when that potential was never fully realized. This grief is legitimate and it deserves space. But alongside that grief is something new, a growing sense of self, a remembering of who they were before they made themselves smaller to fit inside someone else's emotional limits, a reconnecting with their own needs and wants and desires that had been buried under years of putting someone else first. And slowly over time, that grief starts to make room for something that feels a lot like freedom. The avoidant partner carries something different. They carry regret. They carry the very specific kind of regret that comes from knowing that something good was right in front of you and you kept pushing it away until it was gone. They carry the weight of realizing too late that the walls they built to protect themselves ended up being the very things that kept out the love they actually needed. And that is a heavy thing to sit with. Because unlike grief, which moves through you, regret tends to circle back. It asks what if. It plays back all the moments where a different choice could have changed everything. It is relentless in a way that grief sometimes is not. And hopefully, if the avoidant is willing to sit with that regret instead of running from it, it becomes the thing that finally cracks them open enough to change. Because that is what this whole dynamic is ultimately about. Not who wins and who loses, not who was right and who was wrong, but whether both people are willing to do the thing they have been avoiding. For the anxious one, that means finally choosing themselves. For the avoidant, that means finally letting someone in. Neither of those things is easy. Both of them require a kind of courage that most people spend years trying to find. But here is what is true. You cannot keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. The anxious partner cannot keep chasing emotional unavailability and expect to feel secure. The avoidant cannot keep using distance as armor and expect to feel genuinely connected. At some point, the cycle has to break, and more often than not, it breaks when the anxious partner finally decides they have had enough. That decision, as painful as it is the catalyst for everything that comes after. It forces both people out of the comfortable dysfunction they had been living in and into the terrifying but necessary territory of real change. So if you are the anxious one, and you are somewhere in the middle of all of this, know that your feelings are valid. Your needs are not too much. Your desire for consistency and presence and real emotional intimacy is not a flaw. It is a completely reasonable thing to want from a relationship. You did not fail. You gave more than most people would have. And the fact that it was not enough says something about the dynamic, not about your worth. Keep going, keep healing, keep choosing yourself even when it is hard. And if you are the avoidant one, and this is landing somewhere uncomfortable, that discomfort is important. Do not run from it. Sit with it. Ask yourself why closeness has always felt like a threat. Ask yourself what it would actually look like to let someone in all the way. Ask yourself whether the peace you have been protecting is actually peace, or just loneliness with a better excuse. Because real love, the kind that actually fills something inside you, does not come from keeping people at a safe distance. It comes from being brave enough to be seen. All of it. The mess and the fear and the uncertainty, that kind of love is not a threat to who you are. It is the thing that helps you become more of who you were always meant to be. Change is possible. Growth is possible. But only when you are honest enough to look at yourself clearly and brave enough to do something different. The next chapter is always yours to write. Make it one worth reading. And that is the part nobody tells you about healing. It does not happen all at once. It does not arrive like a breakthrough moment where suddenly everything makes sense and the pain is gone and you feel whole again. It is slower than that. It is quieter than that. It happens in small moments you almost do not notice. The morning you wake up and do not immediately check your phone hoping for a message from them. The afternoon you laugh at something and realize for a brief second you forgot to be sad. The evening you sit with yourself in silence and instead of it feeling unbearable, it actually feels okay. Those small moments are the healing, and they matter more than any single conversation or confrontation ever could. But here is what makes healing complicated for the anxious partner specifically. Their nervous system has been wired for a very long time to associate love with uncertainty, to associate connection with anxiety, to associate closeness with the constant fear of losing it. So even when they walk away and start to rebuild themselves, their body does not immediately trust the peace. They might find themselves waiting for something to go wrong, even when nothing is wrong. They might find themselves overthinking interactions with new people, bracing for the same kind of withdrawal they experienced before. They might find it hard to believe that someone could show up consistently, without drama, without the hot and cold cycle they became so used to. And that is not a character flaw. That is a nervous system that learned to stay on high alert because in the past, letting their guard down always seemed to end the same way. Rewiring that takes time. It takes patience with yourself. It takes the willingness to sit with discomfort instead of either chasing it away or running from it. But it can be done. And the people who do that work come out the other side with a kind of emotional clarity that is genuinely rare. They know what they want. They know what they will not accept. They know the difference between love that grounds them and love that destabilizes them. And that knowledge is worth every hard moment it took to earn it. Now here is something that often comes up when people talk about these dynamics, and it is worth addressing directly. Sometimes the anxious partner is told that their anxiety is the problem, that if they could just calm down, just stop needing so much reassurance, just be more relaxed and easygoing, the relationship would work. And on the surface that advice might sound reasonable, but it misses something crucial. When someone's needs are consistently unmet in a relationship, of course they become anxious. Of course they reach out more. Of course they seek reassurance. That is not a character flaw showing itself. That is a completely logical response to an environment that is not giving them what they need to feel secure. The anxiety in most of these relationships is not the cause of the problem. It is a symptom of it, a symptom of being in a connection where you are never quite sure where you stand, where the warmth comes and goes without explanation, where you have to work so hard just to feel like you matter to the person you love. If that same person were in a relationship with someone who was consistently present, emotionally available, and genuinely invested, their anxiety would look completely different. It would not disappear overnight because anxiety has roots that go deeper than any single relationship. But the intensity of it, the desperation of it, would soften significantly because the environment would no longer be feeding it. This is something the avoidant partner needs to understand. When they look at the anxious person and think they are exhausting or too much or too intense, they are not seeing the full picture. They are seeing someone whose needs have been repeatedly ignored, trying harder and harder to get those needs met. That is not weakness. That is survival. And if the avoidant could look at it that way instead of as something to escape from, the entire dynamic could shift. But that requires a level of self-awareness that most avoidant partners have not yet developed, because developing that kind of self-awareness means admitting that your behavior has consequences. It means acknowledging that your need for distance has a cost that you have been letting someone else pay for you, and that is uncomfortable. That is the kind of discomfort most avoidant people have spent their entire lives trying to avoid, which is exactly why real change for them is so rare and so difficult and so worth celebrating when it actually happens. So wherever you are in this journey, whether you are the anxious one still deciding if you have the strength to walk away, or the one who already walked away and is fighting the urge to go back, Or the avoidant one sitting in the quiet aftermath of someone finally leaving you behind, know that this moment is not the end of your story. It is one of the most important chapters in it. It is the chapter where you get to decide what kind of person you want to be on the other side of this. It is the chapter where the patterns that have been running your life in the background finally get brought into the light. And light, as painful as it can be at first, is always where healing begins. You are not too much, you are not too broken, you are not too far gone. You are just someone who loved deeply in a dynamic that could not hold it. And that love, even if it did not land where you hoped, is still evidence of something beautiful inside you. Do not let this experience convince you to shut that down. Let it teach you how to aim it better. The right connection, when it comes, will not make you feel like you are constantly chasing something just out of reach. It will feel like landing, like finally being able to exhale. And you will know it not because it is perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, you do not feel alone inside it. Keep going, keep growing. The best version of your story is still being written.